And I think that ultimately speaks to generosity, and that if we want to be people of substance, if we want to grow, if we want to be people who impact others, if we want to, just be people who become the full self that we actually have the potential to become, then we have to have generosity in the equation.
This is the Untamed Podcast, where only the few dare to go. We're building a community of adventurous high achievers who refuse to trade our dreams for comfortable mediocrity so that we can unleash our untamed potential. Could you be one of the untamed few? Now, your untamed hosts, Mark Lucas and Joel Fritz.
Joel, I thought we would just walk into a conversation, a how-to conversation. How to be the most selfish person that you could ever be.
That's what we're all going for.
When we literally,
that's what we're going for.
Instead of the shirt that says made in Atlanta, made in selfishness. Like we just have.
Get it.
I want to be selfish.
I want what I want. I want everybody to do it for me.
Me. Like, let's just talk about me and how we can be selfish.
I've got a story about that.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
Let's dive into that.
A few years ago, this is, I don't know, 2017, 18-ish. There were national headlines, and so some of you may remember this story, all right? But here's how it goes. There was a blind person in line at Dairy Queen. I don't know where the Dairy Queen was, but there was a blind person in line at Dairy Queen, and $20 fell out of this blind person's pocket. And the person in line behind picked up the $20 and put it right in their pocket. So apparently somebody was actually videoing this with their phone, and it makes national news. So here's how this story plays out. When the person who picked up the $20 bill, because the blind person didn't even know that it had fallen out of their pocket, when that person got up to the cash register, the employee was actually the manager, looked at the individual and said, "Hey, I saw that $20 bill fall out of the blind person's pocket, and I watched you pick it up and put it in your pocket." And the person said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And the manager repeated himself and is like, the blind person dropped a $20 bill, you picked it up, put it in your pocket, and I'd like you to give that $20 bill back to the blind person. They didn't know that it fell out of their pocket. And this individual was like, "Nope, don't know what you're talking about. It's my $20.
That's crazy.
And you go, what is happening right now? Okay, so this is a real story. And here's what happens. The manager said, "Look, we have the right to refuse business to anybody, and there's no way I'm going to serve you."
Good for them.
Until you give the $20 back to the blind person.
Yeah.
And the individual's like, "Fine," and left the store with the $20 in their pocket. I don't know if I have that particular part right.
Yeah.
But here's what happened after. Dairy Queen is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, which most of us listening know is one of the largest funds out there. And it's run by Warren Buffett, or was until just a little bit ago. So Warren Buffett gets wind of this. It makes news. Everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, look at this manager did right by the blind person, et cetera." And then Warren Buffett is like, "I'm going to call." So however many hundreds of people removed this manager is at the Dairy Queen from Warren Buffett, gets a call from the boss of the bosses. And he's like, "Well done, son. Well done." Yeah. But think about this. Like, there's two things in this. One, everybody loves to see somebody stand up for what is right and good. And it ultimately gets celebrated regardless of how corrupt people get, or how base our thinking becomes, or how selfish we actually are and encourage others to be. When something like that happens, it's out of the ordinary, and people, they go bananas when somebody does something right like that. But the antithesis of that is what you and I just mentioned. Is there a more selfish person out there? What happened to this individual in their life that their brain had gotten so far from their actions of being a good human being that they saw that $20 fall out of a blind person's pocket who didn't know it happened, and they thought, "That's my money."
It's so crazy.
That's my money.
Right.
What's this manager talking about? Who are these people? Right? That's my $20.
Ludicrous.
And then in addition to that, Mark, it's $20.
I know.
Like, this is the true state of character of this individual, because $20, who cares about $20 at the end of the day? This person was willing to die on the $20 hill. You know, this is theirs. It's their right, whatever. I'm like, wow, how do you get there?
The only example that comes from a movie that is maybe worse is in Dumb and Dumber 1, where they sell the blind kid the dead parakeet, and he's holding in his hand, here, pretty bird, here, pretty bird.
That's a classic.
Here, pretty bird. And that's just ludicrous.
Right.
I mean, it's literally
it's in
ludicrous. That's why it's in Dumb and Dumber, because it's just asinine that the state of that individual would get to the low of that low.
Right.
And at the end of the day, Toby Keith, and again, I've just recently, since my dad has passed, gotten into country. And I don't remember most of the lyrics, but there's a song that came out in the 80s. And the whole song is, I'm going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about mine. I'm going to talk about me, oh mine. The whole song is just about me, mine, mine. And again, when you think about even early on in our lives, okay, there's one thing that we don't have to teach our kids. They just do naturally, and that's be selfish.
Yeah.
We're all born with this selfish nature.
Yeah.
Okay, we are. So at the end of the day, I think when we laugh at how ridiculous that story is, and we even reference Dumb and Dumber, which is a classic movie. Second one was not as good, no offense. But the first one was just classic. And we really ask ourselves, okay, if we know that we have selfish tendencies, I'll be the first one to admit in front of you and in front of the people that are out there watching this with us, you don't realize, or at least I didn't realize, Joel, how selfish I was until I got married. And then I really didn't realize how selfish I was until I had kids. I think there's these moments in our life where it's magnified how we realize how selfish we are. We just realize it. And I think all of us listening in right now, watching right now, we all identify to large, medium, and small degrees, I'm selfish. I mean, we all have selfish tendencies. So I think what we want to get into in this conversation is, what is the remedy for the natural selfishness that we have inside of us? Because the remedy for me in the saying I do, being married, realizing how selfish I was, because now it's not my schedule, only what I want to do. It's not just where I want to eat. It's not just doing all the fun things that I want to do. It's not the list of things that Marky Mark wants to do. Now we've got another beautiful life that is my lifelong partner, my wife, who now is doing this journey with me as a partnership. And now we both have this mutual oneness, this mutual partnership where we both are trying to give and serve each other. Mm-hmm. And it's that mutual harmony, how you do that. And then when you have kids, again, that goes out the window, because you're like, I have to go to the bathroom to hide from my kids. So it's not just about them. So it's like, at the end of the day, we have these moments that are somewhat epiphany moments where you realize, okay, that was selfish, or okay, I have that selfish tendency. And what we want to spend the majority of time in is the remedy to that, or I think the primary remedy to that is generosity.
That's right. And if you haven't noticed yet, this isn't a podcast about being selfish. It's a podcast about generosity. But we thought, we think through this because we come from this place really where we're naturally selfish. And you illustrated that well with the memes and the eyes and how we really start out young in life. And the question is, how do we get out of that? Or even what's the purpose of that? I mean, we could just live our lives selfish. And I think that we actually get a lot of examples of that in the media. I mean, I feel like young sports stars are groomed, and they don't get on until later in their career to understanding, deeper, more mature things. But they're groomed to just be like, this is my show. I'm the best, and all of that. And it's so interesting to watch as, maybe they have a good upbringing and they're a step ahead. But it takes a long time for somebody, when the spotlight is on them and they truly are good at something, then people just want to give them stuff. They want to give them attention. They want to, put them on a pedestal. And so they have to learn and grow and mature, because when we get to the end of our lives, which we should always be viewing the life now in light of how we want to be remembered or where we're going after life and how we want to live today in light of that. Because when we get to the end of our lives, I mean, people are remembered for their generosity. They're remembered for what they gave, not what they got. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people, you might say, well, that person had a lot, so that's why they're remembered. Well, you really ought to ask, is that why so many people showed up to their funeral? Because I don't know how many people show up to just like rich people or substantial people's funeral. It's the people who gave that have a lot of people show up at their funeral. And it's because they took a little bit of who they were and touched a whole lot of people. And I think that ultimately speaks to generosity. And that if we want to be people of substance, if we want to grow, if we want to be people who impact others, if we want to, just be people who become the full self that we actually have the potential to become, then we have to have generosity in the equation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so well said. I think at the end of the day, I think there's two things that have really helped me fight against my selfish tendencies. And I think we have to look in the mirror right now. We talked a lot at the last episode about being so reminded and looking in the mirror when it comes to beginning to articulate core values and making decisions that we've just processed with the untamed few. At the end of the day, when we do look in the mirror, we have to realize, how do I combat the selfish tendencies? And there's really two thoughts that I have probably every day to one degree. One is, what is humility? And am I truly cultivating humility in my life? And two is an acronym that I've talked a lot about, family. Forget about me, I love you. They both work together and they're both interconnected. But at the end of the day, if I really ask myself when I go to sleep, has there been a moment today that I'm not just stretching and kind of articulating some story that's in Disneyland fairy tale land, but there's a real concrete example of, forget about Marky Mark, I love this person. Forget about Mark, I serve this person. Forget about Mark, I was generous to this person. I blank. It was others focused, and I was generous either with my time, I was generous financially, I was generous in helping them with maybe an area of gifting that I have to help them for no charge. Whatever it might be, there's a moment I'm like, you know what? Thank you, God, that I was obedient. Thank you that I have joy and happiness, which we talk a lot about because our kids and we all want happiness. I experienced great happiness this moment because I was walking out, serving somebody else, loving somebody else, being generous to somebody else. And the other part of humility, and again, I love C.S. Lewis, the way he says it, is that humility is never thinking less of ourselves. That's not what humility is. Humility is thinking about ourselves less often. So I think you're right when you cite the examples of what marketing and media and celebrities and the people that are in the limelight, at the end of the day, it's probably, we don't know from firsthand experience, but it's probably really hard not to think about me, because everybody's talking about me. But at the end of the day, we have to really strive to say, okay, how do I think about myself less often? And not neglect myself, because there's healthy ways to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. But how do I think about myself less often? And with that energy and with that resource of time and intentionality, how do I now go serve others?
Yeah, well, the word that you just said is the word that's just sitting there for all of us to make sure we pay attention to, and that's intentionality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, generosity is one of those things where it's just not going to come naturally. So that's a fascinating thing. Like we say, and so often, if you want to have success, you're going to have to work for it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we know that. The listeners know that. If we're going to have success, we have to work at it. But but generosity is not the kind of thing that just naturally happens. No, selfishness happens. And that's why we open this podcast talking about selfishness, is because if you leave yourself to your own devices, if you just go down the path that you're how would I say it? If you go down the path that you are naturally inclined to go, you will end up at Dairy Queen picking a $20 bill off of the ground putting it in your own pocket, even though the blind person was the one who dropped it in front of you.
Or selling a dead parakeet.
Yeah,
From
there you go.
Yeah.
So we have to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so it's that intentionality, in my opinion, is just so big, like to actually make the decision to be generous. And what people don't seem to understand are it's almost like our selfishness, our internal guide, if you would, that is misleading us often. If we could only understand that generosity is leading to some of the greatest experiences that we all have in life, some of the deepest fulfillment, some of the greatest purpose, that love is known as the most powerful thing in the world for a reason. Mm. I mean, it's critical that we start to think like that and understand that generosity is important because it's going to lead us to some of the greatest experiences and the greatest encounters that we are ever going to have in our life. But we won't just naturally or almost accidentally stumble onto that. We have to understand it and be intentional about it and line our actions up behind it.
You said the word, I couldn't agree more. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably the greatest word we can say every day. And that word is love. And we really have to ask ourselves, and I have to start with myself before I ever ask this of somebody else. Mark, at the end of the day, were you loving today? Not just with your words, but with your actions. Were you truly loving today? And I think I told you this before, Joel, but I'll tell the listeners, I don't think I've shared this. There's this representation of characteristics of what love is and what love is not in my kitchen. And I love that Paul, who wrote to a church in Corinth, would give a beautiful articulation of characteristics of what love is and what love is not in this list. And when he talks about what love is not, there's one in there that is a zinger that really hits the epicenter of the heart of what we're talking about today. And that is, love is not self-seeking. It's not self-seeking. So at the end of the day, we have to, again, with great humility, being sober-minded, we've got to ask ourselves, are we growing in the ways that we are not self-seeking? Can we truly look in the mirror and say, you know what, for the most part today, I hit the mark of not being self-seeking. Because at the end of the day, we want to be loved and we want to give love. We want to give and receive mutually love. That is in the core needs, real needs that we have within all of us as human beings. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, if we want to experience beautiful, lasting love, life-giving love, we've got to ask ourselves, are we being self-seeking? Mm-hmm. Is there a selfishness in the heart, in the actions, in the thoughts, in the inactions of the way that we're interacting with people?
There's lots to unpack there. One of the things that I think is so interesting about that is just the fact, like you said, we all want to be loved. So if we all want to be loved, why is it so hard to love?
Why?
I mean, think about it. Like we all desperately want to be loved. We want to be paid attention to. We want people to share with us something special, give of themselves for us. So why is it so hard for us to give of ourselves? I think that's such an enigma, in that the very thing that we want, we're disinclined to give to others, and that we have to be so intentional to do it. But it's a practice thing. And I think if anything, you know, in this podcast, like people are always asking us, you know, what can I do, right? What should I do? So if we're talking about becoming a person who's generous, then we'd say, well, what can we do? Well, you can practice generosity, right? Just like if you want to be loved, you can practice loving somebody in return, and you will actually become a more loving individual.
Right.
Same with generosity. If you want to be a generous person, you need to practice generosity, and it will actually become a part of your DNA. It will become a part of who you are, and it will be a character trait that just comes out from you, as opposed to something that you have to fight for people to see.
It's so true. And at the end of the day, and again, I'm going to use the word, and this might not be the word that you want to use, and that's okay. I can substitute the word and still make it make sense to you. But ultimately, you and I both have a desire, and there's people that are listening that have a desire to become each and every day more like Jesus. Mm-hmm. There's a desire for us to grow in our relationship that we have with Jesus. And there's this beautiful sentence that I heard years ago: we're never more like Jesus than when we give and serve. And we're talking about giving right now. And again, if you're, for whatever reason right now, you don't want to hear the word Jesus, I can still have it make sense, okay? When we think about legacy, when we think about the man that you want to become, the legacy that you want to leave behind, you'll never become more like that man than when you give and serve, okay? Jesus, obviously, we believe wholeheartedly in the way that he loves all of us unconditionally, wants to be in relationship with everybody and to be able to help them become that man. And he's helped us every single day become that man. But at the end of the day, the essence, the characteristics, the DNA of us becoming great men has giving in the ethos, in the center of us becoming great men with great intentionality, you're right. So we've got to really ask ourselves, what are the different ways that we can be giving? How can we be intentional in the ways that we give to others? And I'll be the first one to admit, when it comes to the financial, and I know we talked a little bit over the phone, you and I, about the financial, and you even shared a story early on in your marriage, how much it should have hurt giving 10% to the church. And yet you and your wife made that decision early on in your marriage to continue that beautiful principle of giving 10% away to the church and giving 10% away to the nonprofit or whatever it might be, but giving to things of great kingdom causes, and to doing that and practicing that as a great discipline for your entire marriage. And Tammy and I have been really good at that times, and there's been times where we've not been so good at that. And there's times that we have to grow in that. And I guess I'm saying that just in great honesty as well. But wherever you are right now, what does the increase look like? What does the increase look like in the way of the financial, in the way of your time, in the way of your resources of time and resources of knowledge, resources of things that you can truly give away to be able to be a blessing and a benefit to others? It's not just financial. Obviously, that's a part of it, and that's a big part of it. But there's other ways to be generous besides just the financial piece. We need to grow and cultivate growth in all areas. But I just want to mention that there have been times for Tammy and I think when I was working and serving as a part of the local church, you and I both have decades of experience individually, and obviously together we have multiple decades of serving in the local church, and we love the local church. There, it was really easy to me. I'm very honest with you and saying, and very honest to the untamed few, it was easy for me to say, absolutely, 10% of my check that I make here as a pastor, which wasn't a large check, but it didn't matter, but 10% goes absolutely back to the church. That was easy. But now in our life at times, it's just figuring out and praying and discussing with my wife, where do we be generous? Where do we already have relational impact and relational connection with entities and ministries and nonprofits that are doing great kingdom work and that we get to come alongside? But it's not always necessarily just 10% to the church, or it could be a combination, or it could be 10% to the base, which I always encourage people, and they kind of grow beyond the 10%. But I always just tell people, you know what, wherever you are right now, you could be at 0% or 1% or 2%. Really ask yourself and have conversations. What does 3% look like? What does giving more of my time look like? Kind of give yourself some grace to kind of grow into it, because maybe that's too big of a jump. Maybe it's not. Maybe you go from 2% giving to 10% giving. Great. Phenomenal. So
I appreciate you being honest about that. That's cool. I think that'll resonate with people. And I think it still goes back. It all goes back to this simplicity that if we're going to be generous people, we have to intentionally plan it into our lives. And when you mention that story of Kristen and I, the way that is played out is basically a 21 and a half year lesson that we can say, here's a testimony of how that worked out for us. But early on, we sat down as a married couple. We had only been married a few weeks, and we went off. And I remember being on a beach in California reading a book because we wanted to build the best foundation that we possibly could. And part of that foundation included generosity. But I'll tell you what, I think right at the beginning there, we had just moved back to Tucson, Arizona. I had moved back, and she had moved with me to Tucson, and we were not making much money. I think that first go around is like $3,000 a month. Yeah. And so when you're looking at $3,000 a month and you're asking, how am I going to give $300? It's not easy, but it's the habit. It was the decision way back then. And I understand that everybody isn't 20. I was 27 and she was 22 at the time, right? I understand everybody's not 27 and 22. And you can even think about living off of $3,000 or whatever. But the point is that to be able to give, if you really think about it, to be able to give $300 of $3,000 is a lot harder than when the numbers get bigger. But for some reason, psychologically, it feels harder. And the only explanation I have for that is, or that to be able to succeed at that, is the discipline of doing it for so many years. Like making the simple decision, I'm going to be generous. And well said when you said, well, maybe you've determined to give 1%. And now it's time to consider 2. Maybe you've been giving 2%. Now it's time to consider 3. I don't know, but how much would you like to be giving? Because if the answer is nothing, then there's where the problem begins.
The selfishness.
Right? You're back at, like if for no other reason, you don't want to become the person behind the blind person at Dairy Queen who actually picks up the $20 and then argues your point of the story, right? Like how you're right. And that's where I think we go. But even, using Jesus as an example, he's the ultimate example. And when he talks about money, it's something totally different. And when he talks about giving, he doesn't talk about just giving your money. He talks about giving your life. Mm-hmm. And so then he says, there's no greater love than this, that one would give their life for their brother or friend. And that is, those are true words, right? Those are true words. But how do you get to be the generous person, so generous that you would give your life? You got to practice generosity along the way. So however it starts for you, let it start somewhere. Be intentional. Ask yourself, how can I be generous? Make a decision of what you're going to be generous with and start doing it, because you cannot delay. You must start at some point if you want to become a generous person. So that's that's it. We've got to practice it.
I love it. And I think there's a mind shift that happened for me and my wife specifically that we pray we're modeling for our kids. And the mind shift was this. When I began to model and believe that we are stewards with what's been given to us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's a foreign word. I think most people understand the word stewardship, even if you're maybe not a part of a church right now or walking as a Christian right now with the Lord. Stewardship is this process of God has given us an opportunity to be good stewards of all that he's given us. And I think for our family and for what we know as truth is that every good and perfect gift comes from God. And when we begin to start processing that and modeling that for our kids, I can even remember 2 examples, just recent examples. One was on Father's Day, where we're in a park in Atlanta for Father's Day. We had these electric scooters and we were cruising around Atlanta. I kept looking back and saying, why are the girls so slow? But Carson and I were cruising in Atlanta and we're in this park in downtown Atlanta, and we just had gotten off and we were getting snow cones. And just like in Atlanta happens so often, the rain came over just like that. The rain came down and we came into this little tent. And in this tent, I started a conversation with an individual that was a part of a nonprofit that was giving back to serve women that had been domestically abused. And that led into a conversation of now all of us huddled in this tent out of the rain, and our kids hearing the tragic stories of what was happening in our own city to women with physical, sexual, verbal abuse. And they were able to watch Dad give generously because I don't own what I've been given. I'm a steward of what I've been given. But that generosity there was modeled in a way of being selfless, not selfish. And I saw the impact on my kids' faces of what they experienced. And that just recently led into a story of my wife telling the kids that we gave last year a substantial amount of money to her friend that was in dire straits. And we were able to do that because at the end of the day, we have to create a mindset of live on 80%, save 10, give 10. And when you start to have that mindset and you start to be not a consumer, but a contributor, like we've talked about in other episodes, and you start to ask yourself and model your kids, how do I contribute what God has given us to bless others and to impact others? There is a happiness meter that goes through the roof. There is a joy that is indescribable, as we know, as we all listen to this and hear this, that is so beautiful for us to model for our family, to model for our employees, to model in the community that we serve in, that we live in. This is infectious and has a ripple effect that impacts nations of people when it's done well and it's done right.
Absolutely. Love it. Yeah. Well, I mean, we got to start practicing, right? Yeah. Or I should say, if we've been practicing, we need to reevaluate and ask what this next season holds, right? If we haven't been practicing generosity, now's the time to start. What that looks like for you, really our challenge would be for you to step back out of your ordinary world, figure out how to get away and make some space for that. And I want to continue to tell everybody that we are often having retreats where you're able to do that. We have challenges every month where it helps you practice good habits. So check and see what challenge we have going on this month in the Untamed Few Facebook page. And from the page, you can get into the group. It's a private group. We're more than welcome to come and join us there. But we run challenges every month so that people can start practicing these good habits. Maybe we'll do a generosity challenge the month that you happen to be listening to this and checking in on us. So, yeah.
Love it.
Let's practice it, man.
Let's do it.
Let's practice living untamed. There you go.
If this episode sparked something in you, please subscribe and even share it with someone who's ready to take their life to the next level. We're always on the hunt for men who are looking to become untamed and release their untamed potential. Also, if you found value in this conversation, then please rate the podcast and leave a comment. It makes a huge impact in building our community. We'll see you next time when the adventure continues, or maybe when yours begins.